September 1943, northern France. German security reports begin noting something impossible. Sentries found dead at their post with no gunshot heard, no alarms raised and no witnesses, not even from the men standing only a few meters away. Military police blame exhaustion, desertion, even heart failure. Until one depot, east of Cambrai, loses 5 guards in a single hour without a single recorded sound. What German officers don't know is that a lone SOE operative is already inside their perimeter, carrying a weapon their experts dismissed as a joke. It looks like a piece of pipe, weighs less than a wrench, and has no slide, no hammer, and no mechanical signature a trained soldier would recognize. Yet it is about to demonstrate something no conventional pistol of World War II could do. As a sentry pauses to light a cigarette, the operative closes the final steps, lifts the crude tube, and pulls the trigger. What follows is not a shot, not a crack, not even a whisper, just a man collapsing silently into the gravel, and a weapon finally proving why it existed. The depot itself is unremarkable on a situation map. Another fuel and munitions point-feeding truck columns and troop trains that sustain occupation forces. For London's Special Operations Executive, these anonymous sites are both opportunity and trap. They are priority targets for sabotage, yet guarded by men whose reflexive shout or single rifle shot can bring down a chain of response that no lone agent can survive. The difference between a clean withdrawal and another missing name often comes down to what nearby ears register in the first second after a trigger is pulled. The man in the ditch has spent months learning to live inside that margin. Training schools in the Highlands and English safe houses have taught him how long a tired sentry lingers over a cigarette, how far boots can be heard on wet gravel, how wind or distant traffic can cover his approach. Yet every exercise has been haunted by the same flaw, the sharp, unmistakable crack of even a suppressed pistol. Tonight he is carrying something built to erase that weakness. It will not help him if he is spotted at 30 meters, and it will not save him in a firefight. But if he can stand within a few paces of a German guard, press its trigger once, and hear nothing that changes the rhythm of the night, then the balance between saboteur and sentry is about to shift. By 1942, the Special Operations Executive, SOE, had perfected almost everything except silence. Across occupied France, Norway, the Low Countries and the Balkans, sabotage teams were blowing bridges, derailing trains and cutting communication lines. But again and again, mission reports came back with the same brutal pattern. A sentry shot at close range, a muffled crack in the night, a burst of shouted German, and then floodlights, machine guns, and dead agents. Noise, not courage or planning, was killing resistance networks, conventional. Suppressors of the era were little more than engineering compromises. They could shave a gunshot from the agony of bare muzzle blast down to something closer to industrial machinery, but even quiet pistols still barked loud enough to be instantly recognizable as weapons. Efforts inside the American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, with modified .22 pistols and oddities like crossbows or dart guns, produced curiosities, not dependable field tools. British ordnance officers, trained on doctrines written for open battlefields, saw the whole idea of a truly silent firearm as a fantasy best left to crime novels. Yet SOE's operational math left no room for theory. Agents parachuted into farm fields, carrying forged papers, a radio, and a few chances to eliminate a guard without warning his partner 10 steps away. Radio silence rules, curfews, and ruthless reprisals meant that a single noisy mistake could unravel an entire underground group in a night. Somewhere between technical skepticism and field necessity, a question kept returning to London. If a pistol could be made that killed quietly enough to be mistaken for a cough or a dropped tool, how many doomed missions could be turned into successes? The statistics were not abstract. In parts of France and the Low Countries, many failed attacks on guards and collaborators could be traced to the sound of the first shot. After-action summaries describe the same chain of events. A pistol fired at a doorway or fence corner, a shout from someone who heard something wrong in the night, and then sweeps that rolled up not only the shooters, but the safe houses around them. Each time London sent weapons and instructors back into the field. Each time the sound of gunfire undid months of organisation in a few panicked minutes. The physics seemed unforgiving. An unsuppressed pistol round produced peak sound levels in the 150–160 decibel range. Early suppressors, adapted from sporting designs, could trim that by 20 or 30 decibels, but the result was still an unmistakable crack. To push the noise lower risked starving the bullet of energy. To keep lethality meant allowing muzzle blast and mechanical action to advertise the shot. Conventional designers accepted that trade-off as fixed. For SOE case officers reading yet another report of agents executed after a compromised operation, that conclusion was unacceptable. The problem was no longer how to make a better pistol for soldiers. It was how to create a killing tool that matched a mission profile orthodox manuals did not even acknowledge. Hidden behind the hedges and brick walls of a converted estate at Welwyn Garden City, 20 miles north of London, sat a facility unlike any other in Britain's wartime arsenal. Other establishments tested rifles, calibrated artillery, or refined explosives. Station 9 received the problems that no conventional department wanted to touch. Its workshops hummed at odd hours, its laboratories produced prototypes that looked more like industrial contraptions than weapons, and its corridors echoed with the clipped voices of engineers who had been instructed explicitly to ignore doctrine. Here, orthodoxy was a hindrance, not a foundation. Among its staff was Hugh Reeves, a compact engineer with a habit of examining machines as if he were reading their intentions. His background made him an anomaly in a field dominated by gunsmiths. He had designed folding motorcycles for airborne troops, explosive charges disguised as lumps of coal, and waterproof containers that could survive saltwater landings. What he lacked in firearms pedigree, he compensated for with a mind that treated every problem as a piece of mechanical choreography. If a part did not need to exist, he removed it. If a design rule prevented a solution, he discarded the rule rather than the goal. The brief that arrived on his workbench in early 1942 was deceptively short. SOE needed a handheld weapon that could reliably kill at close range, survive rough field conditions, accept readily available ammunition, and, most critically, produce so little noise that even a man standing a few paces away would hear nothing he recognized as gunfire. This was not a request for refinement, it was a demand for a new category. Standard automatics were designed for range, volume, and speed. This weapon required none of those qualities. It needed to kill once, maybe twice, in absolute stillness. Reeves began by stripping away assumptions embedded in ordinary pistol design. A semi-automatic slide cycling after every shot was a mechanical orchestra, metal impact, spring recoil, brass ejection. Unacceptable. A conventional muzzle blast, even suppressed, was far too sharp. Unacceptable. The power of high-velocity rounds carried an acoustic penalty in the form of a supersonic crack. Also unacceptable. Bit by bit, the silhouette of a normal handgun dissolved, replaced by a tube where the suppressor was the weapon, and the barrel, bolt, and magazine were mere supporting elements. Station 9's culture enabled the transformation. Tools and materials were requisitioned without explanation. Machinists cut parts that made no intuitive sense. Prototype chambers were stuffed with baffles, ports, and rubber components arranged to strangle gas expansion before it escaped. The first iteration looked absurd, as if someone had cobbled together plumbing scraps into a rough cylinder. But when Reeves hefted it, he did not see absurdity. He saw a mechanism tuned to a task no previous weapon had been built to perform. In that cramped workshop north of London, the war's strangest pistol was almost ready for its first audience, one that would not receive it kindly.
If you're enjoying this documentary, please like the video and share it with fellow World War II enthusiasts. Hit subscribe as well. Your support really matters and keeps this channel moving forward.
When Reeves' prototype left Station 9 and arrived at SOE's Baker Street offices, its reception bordered on disbelief. The courier unwrapped a canvas roll to reveal not a refined sidearm, but a metal tube roughly 30 centimeters long. 2/3 of its mass was an oversized suppressor casing. The remainder was a compact bolt assembly, and a detachable magazine that doubled as the grip. There were no lines to please an armourer's eye, no polished contours, no ergonomic shaping, no recognizable features of a service pistol. To many of the officers who handled it that morning, it looked like a workshop accident. On paper, the specifications did little to improve first impressions. Chambered in 32 ACP with a planned variant in 1919 mm, the weapon used subsonic ammunition that traded velocity for silence. Effective range was listed in single digits, emphasizing point-blank engagement. Magazine capacity was meagre, and after each discharge the operator had to manually rotate and slide a bolt to chamber the next round. Compared to Browning automatics, Colt pistols, or even captured German sidearms, it appeared laughably slow and dangerously limited. Evaluation notes captured the skepticism. Test officers described it as impractical for combat, unsuitable for close-quarters fighting, and too restricted in capability to justify field deployment. One internal memorandum phrased it more bluntly. This device is no pistol at all. Engineers accustomed to decades of incremental refinement saw only deficiencies: lack of rapid fire, limited ammunition, crude ergonomics. The weapon's appearance amplified their resistance. Military culture favoured predictable forms, and nothing about this tube-shaped object aligned with accepted patterns. Yet the criticisms revealed something deeper. Every perceived flaw, minimal range, slow cycling, tiny magazine, aligned perfectly with the mission that had birthed the weapon. Its purpose was not to win a standoff or dominate a street fight. It was to allow a single operator to approach an unalerted guard, fire a shot that collapsed a human target, and produce a sound indistinguishable from ambient noise. In that context, velocity mattered less than acoustics. Rate of fire mattered less than control. Appearance mattered not at all. What few in that Baker Street room understood was that Reeves had not attempted to build a quieter pistol. He had abandoned the pistol as a category. The weapon they were holding was a delivery system for a unique tactical requirement, one never addressed by conventional doctrine. In time, ballistic meters and field reports would vindicate the design. But in those early weeks of assessment, the Welrod, named informally after its birthplace, seemed destined for dismissal. It would take data, not persuasion, to show that the pipe-shaped oddity was not a failed gun, but a new kind of solution. On a cold October morning in 1942, the skepticism that had shadowed Reeves's creation was brought face to face with measurement. A test range at Station 9, flanked by earth berms, sandbag walls, and a scatter of instrument cables, became the proving ground. Technicians arranged their equipment with deliberate precision, calibrated sound meters at fixed distances of 5, 10, and 15 meters, pressure gauges, and a block of ballistic gelatin representing a human torso. Nothing about the setup suggested drama, yet what happened on that range would redraw the boundaries of what a firearm could be. Reeves stepped forward with the prototype in hand, its matte cylinder absorbing the weak autumn light. He loaded subsonic 32 ACP cartridges into the magazine, locked the bolt, and took his position at the prescribed 8-meter line. Observers, many of whom had dismissed the design weeks earlier, leaned forward as he raised the weapon. They expected compromise, a dull but recognizable crack, perhaps muted but unmistakably gunfire. Instead, the discharge arrived as something entirely different, a soft, compressed exhalation, more like a gloved hand brushing fabric than a mechanical explosion. The ballistic gelatin shuddered as the round passed through, its internal channel expanding cleanly. But the meters told the real story. Where an unsuppressed pistol produced sound levels near 155-160 decibels, and even experimental suppressor systems seldom dipped below 130, the Welrod's first shot registered in the low 70s at 15 feet. Quieter than normal conversation, quieter than many ambient rural environments, technicians rechecked the calibration, certain the equipment must be wrong. Then Reeves cycled the bolt, a controlled, nearly silent motion, and fired again. The numbers remained almost identical. Shot after shot across 18 seconds, the readings stabilized within a remarkably narrow band. There was no supersonic crack. The ported barrel prevented it. There was no mechanical chatter. The bolt eliminated it. The suppressor baffles, arranged in a stacked sequence of metal and rubber elements, stripped the gas of energy before it could escape as noise. Even the firing assembly's internal padding muted what little remained. This was not suppression, as understood by any existing standard. It was acoustic erasure. Penetration tests reinforced the paradox. Despite its reduced velocity, the subsonic round retained enough energy to pass through more than 6 inches of gelatin, replicating a lethal channel through vital organs at close range. There was no trade-off between silence and lethality within its intended envelope. The weapon excelled precisely where sabotage missions demanded it. For the engineers who'd predicted failure, the data created a rare moment of collective re-evaluation. The measurements contradicted doctrine, but doctrine could not contradict measurements. The Welrod worked, not as a pistol, but as a purpose-built instrument for killing in silence. And as the team recorded the final figures, it became clear that this quiet cylinder from Station 9 was about to reshape SOE operations. The next step was proving it where it mattered most. In the dark, under occupation, with lives depending on whispers instead of gunshots. The first Welrods left Station 9 in sealed crates marked only with coded designations, bound for training schools in the Scottish Highlands and quiet safe houses scattered across England. There, instructors introduced operatives to a weapon unlike anything they had carried before. Lessons emphasized discipline over instinct, approach during ambient noise, close distance slowly, fire during the target's exhale when auditory focus softens. Trainees practiced stepping to the rhythm of wind against fences or the rumble of a passing lorry, treating silence as both ally and adversary. Because the Welrod's range was measured in single-digit meters, planning cells adapted entire missions around its constraints. Targets were selected not for ease of access, but for predictability of sentry movement. Routes were mapped to ensure operatives could reach a guard's blind spot without crossing exposed ground. Instructors reframed the weapon's limitations as advantages. Its slow bolt action forced deliberate, precise engagements. Its minimal report allowed sequential eliminations without triggering alarms. Its crude exterior disguised a mechanism that could function after being buried or dropped. By late 1942, field reports from occupied France and the Low Countries revealed a pattern. Teams equipped with Welrods approached depots, communications posts, and administrative chateaux along the perimeter first. Guards fell in careful succession, sometimes within mere paces of their partners, with no alert spreading inward. One composite account, drawn from multiple SOE after-action summaries, describes 2 agents clearing more than a dozen positions around a French relay station in under an hour. Interior personnel continued routine tasks unaware that the building's security cordon had vanished. The weapon's effectiveness reshaped tactics. Sabotage teams could move deeper into enemy infrastructure before detection. Missions previously deemed suicidal, extracting prisoners from garrisons, destroying ammunition caches surrounded by paired sentries, or infiltrating interrogation centres, became possible. In operations where time dictated survival, the Welrod's silence bought minutes that no conventional firearm could. Meanwhile, instructors pushed students to understand the psychological dimension. A guard collapsing without sound created confusion among enemy patrols. Bodies discovered without audible engagement complicated German counterintelligence assessments. Reports mentioning uncertain cause of death, or no gunfire heard nearby, became more common, sowing doubt in occupation units trained to respond to noise. The Welrod's success changed mission doctrine in London. Request forms surged. Planners began assigning the weapon not as an experiment but as a core tool for infiltration. And across the dark fields and narrow lanes of occupied Europe, operatives moved with a new confidence. They understood the weapon's limits. They respected its narrow range. But they had learned something crucial. When used as designed, the Welrod did not merely quiet a gunshot. It removed the sound from the equation entirely, turning the night itself into cover. Across occupied Europe, German command posts began receiving incident reports that defied the logic of conventional security doctrine. Sentries were discovered slumped against walls or lying beside fuel drums, rifles in their hands, with no one able to recall hearing anything that resembled gunfire. Patrols reported routine rounds interrupted only by the sight of a fallen comrade, whose partner, sometimes only a few meters away, had noticed nothing except a sudden absence from a familiar post. These unexplained losses unsettled units trained to respond to sharp auditory cues. Without a sound to trace, the threat seemed to appear and vanish inside the gaps between footsteps. Counterintelligence detachments attempted to impose order on the confusion. They issued guidelines for denser rotations, overlapping patrols, and mandatory radio check-ins every 15 minutes. But the measures failed to address the underlying reality. 2 operatives armed with Welrods could remove a pair of sentries in the same brief interval. A perimeter that appeared solid from a distance might already be collapsing, its weaknesses multiplying silently with each unremarked disappearance. In some districts, occupation authorities circulated warnings about special silent weapons, though few details accompanied the term. No drills existed for identifying a threat that produced no acoustic signature. Meanwhile, SOE and OSS analysts were compiling a clearer picture. Training centres in Scotland and England had already documented unusually high first-shot success rates when engaging unalerted targets at the weapon's recommended distances. Field teams confirmed that the Welrod remained functional even after harsh treatment, burial, drops from height, immersion in mud, conditions that would disable more complex pistols. The weapon's simplicity enabled not only reliability but consistency, a quality prized among operatives who rarely had second chances. Mission planners began integrating these findings into a shifting tactical landscape. Objectives once rejected as too risky were reconsidered, demolishing bridges guarded around the clock, striking regional headquarters with minimal personnel, reaching secure rooms inside interrogation centres. The Welrod was not universally applicable. It had no place in open firefights or rapid assaults. But its specialised profile created a new category of operation, missions where precision and silence mattered more than range or firepower. As reports accumulated, so did a subtler psychological effect. Occupation units, already stretched thin by partisan attacks and supply pressures, grew wary of positions that seemed vulnerable in unexpected ways. The absence of audible warning complicated their attempts to understand or counter resistance activity. A guard force that could not hear losses in real time struggled to maintain confidence in its own procedures, and for SOE, this uncertainty was as powerful as any demolition charge. The Welrod's quiet efficiency did more than enable individual missions. It introduced doubt into an occupation system built on vigilance. That shift in perception would shape the final chapters of covert warfare as decisively as any explosion. By the final years of the war, the Welrod had travelled far from the workshops of Station 9. Production shifted to firms such as the Birmingham Small Arms Company, where technicians refined internal baffles, adjusted tolerances and prepared small batches in different calibers. A few thousand units were eventually completed, modest by the standards of mass-produced small arms, but transformative within the specialised world of clandestine operations. Norwegian commandos carried them during missions connected to the heavy water sabotage effort. Partisans in Italy and Denmark used them to remove key sentries before larger strikes. OSS teams in Southeast Asia employed them in dense terrain, where even a muffled gunshot could echo unpredictably. After 1945, as Europe attempted to rebuild and intelligence services restructured, many of the operations that had relied on the Welrod remained classified. Logs and field notes disappeared into restricted archives, and personnel moved on to new conflicts or civilian lives. Yet the pistol itself resisted obscurity. Variants appeared in British hands during the Malayan emergency and the Cyprus conflict, their silent performance suited to situations where surprise outweighed volume. Unconfirmed accounts, typical of the blurred edges of post-war intelligence work, placed it in the equipment of certain units during later periods of unrest. Whatever the truth, the design endured because it met needs that had not changed. Modern descendants carried forward its concepts. The Swiss VP9, adopted by several special operations units, followed the Welrod's mechanical lineage almost directly. An integrated suppressor surrounding the barrel, a manually cycled action, and ammunition calibrated to remain subsonic. Contemporary suppressor technology likewise drew from Reeves's principles: gas redirection through ported barrels, multi-stage expansion chambers, and baffle geometries designed to bleed energy rather than simply muffle it. In museums, surviving Welrods sit behind glass beside more recognizable weapons, their plain tubes hinting at a function far more specialized than their appearance suggests. What endures is not only the object, but the mindset that produced it. Reeves had refused to treat conventional pistol design as a starting point. He treated it as irrelevant to the question at hand. The Welrod emerged from a willingness to discard established assumptions in favor of a tool tailored precisely to a narrow problem, eliminating a sentry without alerting the man a few steps away. Its legacy therefore stretches beyond clandestine arsenals. It serves as a reminder that innovation often begins when familiar categories are set aside, when engineers and planners allow function to dictate form without concern for expectations. The weapon that began life as a ridiculed cylinder in a workshop north of London eventually shaped missions across continents. And though its shots were seldom heard, their consequences echoed through resistance movements and intelligence services long after the war's end. In that quiet legacy lies a final connection to the operative who once lay in a drainage ditch, holding an object many had dismissed. He trusted it not because it looked like a weapon, but because it performed a task no other tool could. History would remember the silence more than the shape.
If you've made it this far, you're one of us, searching for the truth behind the headlines and the courage behind the silence. Subscribe to the channel, and let's keep exploring the hidden wars, secret operations, and untold fates that shape the world we live in.